So we will start with the presentation of several EU initiatives which are supporting the rural housing. So we are welcoming Matthew Baldwin, who is head of the Housing Task Force DG ENER. We also welcome two representatives from the Joint Research Center, Clara Hormigos Feliu and Hagemann Arellano, and as well Martin Gauk from ESPON European Grouping of Territorial Cooperation Group. So now, Matthew, you have the floor to make your presentation on the Housing Task Force.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Pascal. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to join you, and I'm slightly embarrassed to be taking the floor first because I am convinced of one thing, that I know the least of all of you at the moment about the challenges that you face on rural housing, and I'm here to learn as much as possible, I'm afraid, in what's going to be a slightly short morning. One of the problems with starting up a new task force on an issue like housing is that you're rather busy in the short term. Let me say a few words about the origin of the task force, how we're addressing it, and outline some pointers as to how I think we can do some really important work together. I think Patricia also, perhaps, sorry, maybe it was Aude, you mentioned the President's initiative here, and that's the origin of all of this. Housing has zoomed up the political agenda in Europe. I think I can say that on a Zoom call extremely quickly. We have a serious housing crisis. It's basically a supply and demand crunch. There aren't enough dwellings, with a very serious impact on the question of affordability. This is market economics 101. Of course, this crisis, these economic analysis impact on people. It's an extremely serious crisis affecting predominantly young people, mostly, but I'll come back to that, in cities, not just in cities. Young families, vulnerable people. We're seeing homelessness spike all across the European Union. And it's affecting everyone in the European Union. I think all 27 member states are facing the crisis to a greater or lesser degree. But we also recognize just how different the housing markets are across the EU, between member states, and often within member states, and back there to the different challenges facing urban and rural areas. The decision of the President of the Commission to appoint the first ever Commissioner for Housing, my boss, Dan Jorgensen, who's also responsible for energy, so he's a busy man, I think reflects the seriousness of that crisis, reflects the growing sense that the EU could and should contribute to addressing it, whilst respecting the principle of subsidiarity, absolutely fundamental, the internal division of competences with member states, because housing remains essentially a national, regional, and local responsibility. So we see our role as we start to develop our plans. The task force has been in place since the 1st of February, as trying to support as effectively as possible the different competent authorities across the union. So I think we'll need to be looking hard at the questions of how we can address the supply and demand issues related to affordable housing, both, of course, in the rental and the sales markets. We'll be looking at the construction sector's competitiveness, both on the issue of new build, but also renovation, looking at both construction products and perhaps also at construction services. We'll look at the whole range of issues as far as we can relating to planning and permitting, which of course is very much a multi-level governance question affecting predominantly local action. Skills, homelessness I mentioned, which is really a scourge on an unacceptable issue, I think, in Europe. The issues around housing speculation, short-term rentals for tourism, state aid rules, and perhaps most importantly, funding and financing, providing more investment into housing and trying to generate more private support. To support this work, and I stress using the word coordination across the Commission, not trying to take over all the very important workflows that are already existing inside the Commission, the College has established a housing task force, which I'm honoured to lead, reporting directly to Dan Jorgensen, who's the Commissioner for Housing. We will be reaching out to colleagues in all parts of the Commission. We have a number of colleagues seconded to us, but we're a small team, around 20 people, based here in Brussels. And we will be reaching out as effectively as we can to all the other institutions in the EU, member states and stakeholders, and trying to support the Commissioner and his team in putting forward and then implementing a European affordable housing plan. Again, I underline all the existing workflows continue. For example, in DG ENER, my colleagues doing energy efficiency and the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which is an important tool, they will continue their work. We're not taking over all of their business, and that's very important. You should stay in touch with them. The first priority for us this year, 2025, is going to be a major outreach and dialogue with the member states, first and foremost. Again, 27 housing markets, we need to encourage them to work together, to share ideas, to see what is possible, where we can add value at the European level. With the European Parliament, who have launched a special committee on housing, which began its work at the end of January and will report early next year. With all the other institutions, I'm sure we will hear today from the Committee of the Regions, we will hear from the Economic and Social Committee, I'm sure, and of course, all the different stakeholders, trying to shape the key housing priorities that we can address at the European level. I've set out there some of the issues that we're looking at. I've touched on a number of them already. And what I really want to stress is that we want to learn from you. This is the first chance I've had to speak to a rural housing audience. One of the things the Commission hates to say is, I don't know, and we don't know yet the possible answers that can address the issues in rural areas. Just if I dare to say a few words about that, knowing the least of everyone in this first panel, one of the issues we look at as the measuring stick is what we call the overburden rate. When as an individual, if you're spending more than 40%, or actually the OECD uses 30%, but let's say 40% of your disposable income, your post-tax income, on housing and the related costs of living, such as your energy costs, your water, your sewage, your local taxes. If you're spending more than 40%, your life becomes very difficult indeed. What we're seeing is those numbers rising. In cities, the overburden rate is nearly 11%, but it's also reached 7% in rural areas. So I think we shouldn't forget, and we will not forget, the impact of the housing crisis on rural areas. And of course, the issues are connected. As the housing market overheats in cities, it spills over into the suburbs and also into rural areas, and we can see these impacts. So I want to stop so I can listen and learn from the other colleagues who know more, who are going to go next, and I will stay online for as long as we can. But please, can we treat this as the first conversation on a very, very important topic to us, not the last. I was very interested to hear about the plans, Aude, you have in the Rural Pact for establishing a housing group. We would support you in that, and we'll do our best to support the work on that. We'll be a small team, but we would really like to do everything we can. I hope that wasn't too long. Thanks very much for inviting us here today, and I'm now going to shut up and listen. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for presenting this quite ambitious initiative, and also all the links that you intend or you are developing with other initiatives with several EU institutions. It's very, very important. We could take a couple of minutes if we have some questions from the participants to your initiative, to your presentation. I don't know. I do not see if there are people who are raising a hand, so my colleagues will help me. Otherwise, if we do not get any question, I have at least one question. How can the Rural Pact community engage in the process of the newly housing task force that you have presented? Because we are here a community which is growing, and this issue of rural housing is very, very important. So how would you see this, I would say, collaboration or at least partnership in a way or in another?
Well, it's a very good question. I've got rather a basic answer, which is we need to join in forums like this. And first and foremost, we need to understand the scale and the extent of the problems. I would like to learn from you and learn as much as possible this morning about what solutions have been tried. I should have said in my opening remarks, I'm particularly interested because I think we're going to be, try to be modest in our ambitions early on, to hear about the best practices. One of the things I find slightly surprising is how little that are best practice shared across the European Union, between member states in particular. And those best practices apply to creative ways of looking at funding and financing, different ways of looking at mortgages, all the different tools we can make to try to make to try to increase the supply of affordable housing to people who are really struggling to reach it. And I know that I'm sure that the situations and some of the solutions for rural areas will be different. We're trying not to have a sort of one-size-fits-all approach, so that the more we can learn from you through informal ways, please reach out to us with your ideas. There will be a big consultation period where we will be organizing different discussion forums with the European Parliament on a range of different issues. Please take every advantage of these, and don't be shy. Come forward with your ideas and suggestions, and we'll do our best to include them in the affordable housing plan, as I said, which is planned for the early part of next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for your feedback on this question. I see that we have 2 questions in the chat. Perhaps, Patricia, you can help me,
yes.
or invite the persons who have put questions in the chat.
Yes, let's take quickly. We will have more time for Q&A to everybody. That's also later. But there are 2. One is from Frederick. I don't know if you want to comment it. You are mentioning the European Housing Cooperative, and that you find it very interesting, and you are asking whether there is a plan to support this specific tool, the European Housing Cooperative. That's one question.
Just briefly, I find it very, very fascinating when I learned about it, but I know very few examples of European housing cooperatives, and I wonder why that is and what can be done, and what are your plans to change that? Because I think that's a big lever to really impact or exact impact on that field.
Well, here's where you see how I'm still at the bottom of my learning curve. I don't know much about the operation of European housing cooperatives in the rural context, and I'd like to learn more from you, and to see how that can work. Instinctively, it sounds like a very interesting idea. I see another question from Jose, or I'm sorry, maybe Jose Ospina, about specific funding programs proposed for supporting innovative housing initiatives. It's a very interesting question. We are looking with the European Investment Bank and all the other different financial players, the national promotional banks, the EBRD, the Council of Europe Bank, which does a tremendous amount on social housing, to see where we can do things differently, how we can improve the flow of funding and financing. And I know the EIB is particularly interested in these innovative ideas to support the construction industry. And watch this space. The EIB will hold a forum early next month, I think, where a lot of their ideas will be becoming clearer. And there are many different financial players working on this in this space, and I'm keen that we learn from each other and coordinate well between ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. I see that we have still 1 question, but Patricia, I think we should perhaps move gradually to the second speaker and come back on your question, Laura, which is, I think, quite important, and we can discuss it after the different presentations if we have still the time. So thank you very much, Matthew. So I'm going to give the floor to Clara Hormigos Feliu from the GRC, who will present housing and energy efficiency in EU rural areas. Clara, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. Let me try to share my screen. So hopefully you can see my presentation now.
Yes, we do, Clara.
Okay, perfect. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. So today I wanted to talk to you about some work that we are doing at the Joint Research Center. I'm trying to assess from a quantitative point of view, so in a very data-based approach, what could be the main challenges and opportunities for housing and energy. So I will be talking about housing in the context of energy and energy efficiency in the rural areas of the EU. So the things I would like to address first is what we know about rural households in the EU, where they stand in terms of energy consumption, in terms of renovation rates, and in terms of their main characteristics. And then I would also like to discuss some indicators that we are developing about the EU building stock at really high spatial resolution. So based on high spatial resolution data, including opportunities for rooftop photovoltaics, which could be really interesting for rural areas, and I will be discussing this in a moment. So beginning with rural households in the EU. First of all, from the household budget survey, we already know that rural households are spending a higher share of their total expenditure on energy when we compare them to towns and suburbs and cities. This is around 7% of the household expenditure that rural households are devoting to energy. And in terms of energy sources, we are seeing that rural households are using more or less equally gas, oil and coal, wood logs, and renewables and electricity. So 1 in 4 households uses one of these sources as their main source of energy, right? This is a very different situation than what happens in cities and towns and suburbs, where more than half of the households are using gas as their main energy source. Then in terms of renovations, now we have some very interesting data from the EU Statistics on Income and Living Conditions Survey. This is 2023 data, and the SILC, this survey for 2023 included a dedicated module on energy efficiency, which tells us how much renovations improving energy efficiency are being implemented, also by degree of urbanization. And here what we are seeing is that actually renovation rates, these renovations improving energy efficiency, are higher in rural areas. So they are around 29% in rural areas, and they are a little bit less, around 25% or less in cities and towns and suburbs. This is at the EU level. It's not true for all of the member states, but as a general trend, rural areas are having these higher renovation rates. Other characteristics that are quite important when we look at rural households in the context of energy efficiency as well are tenure status and dwelling types. In terms of tenure status, we are seeing that rural households are very likely to be owned. So we have a high share of ownership in rural areas. This is the blue part of this pie that you are seeing here. And we are seeing that 78% of rural households are owned. And this is a share that is much less in cities and also to some extent in towns and suburbs. And in terms of dwelling types, this will not come as a surprise, but we are seeing that most of rural dwellings, around 80%, are houses, either detached or semi-detached. This means that dwellings in rural areas are bigger, are larger, and this can pose problems for energy efficiency. And now I would like to show you this effect of this larger rural housing a little bit more in detail using this high resolution data that I was talking about. So here what I'm showing you are 2 indicators that we have computed at high spatial resolution using data from the digital building stock model, which gives us the building footprints, like really the shapes of the buildings, and satellite data from the global human settlement layer. So the first indicator shows you the residential building volume per inhabitant. You can see it in the map and also by degree of urbanization and member states. And what we are seeing at the EU level is that in rural areas, these residential building volumes per inhabitant are much higher, almost 42% higher in rural areas than in cities. And the other indicator I am showing you here is the building compactness, so how compact a building is. And this is important because we know that buildings that are more compact tend to be more energy efficiency because they have less envelope, so less outer surface, and then they are less likely to suffer thermal losses, right? We have assessed this at high spatial resolution. You can see it here in the plot by member states, and the result is very clear. Buildings in rural areas are much less compact than in cities and towns and suburbs, and this is true for all of the member states and also at the EU level, and this can pose problems for energy efficiency. But the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is a particular opportunity which can be very interesting for rural areas from a technical point of view. So last year, with the colleagues at the GRC, we did an assessment also at high resolution of the potential of rooftop photovoltaics in the EU, across the EU. And what we find is that actually rural areas have a very high potential of producing electricity with rooftop PV when we look at the potential per inhabitant. This is easy to understand if we know that rural areas have this housing which is larger, which is mostly houses and semi-detached houses, and this gives us a very large potential per inhabitant. You can see here at the member states with this more than 2,000 kilowatt hours per inhabitant per year that rural housing could produce with rooftop photovoltaics. And this, in most of the member states, actually could cover the entirety of the energy consumption of rural households, right? And moreover, knowing that rural households have this high rate of ownership, this also facilitates implementation of these renewable solutions and the implementation of self-consumption systems. We are already seeing higher renovation rates, which is promising. So here, we really believe that rooftop PV could be a very good opportunity. And just to sum up a little bit, we discussed a little bit what's happening in rural households, that they are spending more in energy, that there are many sources of energy used by rural households, not only gas, that we have larger and less compact buildings that can be challenging when it comes to energy efficiency. But on the other hand, we have a high share of rural ownership and large roof areas per inhabitant, which could make rural areas really well placed to implement rooftop PV systems and other self-consumption systems in terms of energy. And we are also seeing these high renovation rates in rural areas. And that is all I wanted to say. Thank you so much, and I look forward to discussing further.
Thank you very much, Clara. It was I have learned a lot, I must say, a lot of data collection, which is very important to understand and to better, I would say, understand the place of the rural areas in this framework of energy efficiency. So a lot of work that the GRC has developed. So it was very useful to have you with us today. So without waiting more, I will pass the floor now to Laura Hagemann from as well the GRC to present how the new European Bauhaus is supporting the rural housing in rural areas. Laura,
Thank you.
have the floor.
Thank you, Pascal. I'm very happy to be here. The two previous panelists were very interesting. So the task force, but also Clara bringing this data about, that is essential to design good policies. I'm going to come back to something that is a little bit more generic by bringing in the European Bauhaus. We have been working widely on housing, and we will do in the future with the focus that the European Bauhaus will have on neighborhood transformation with the ENER facility. And we will be part also of this housing working group. But I wanted to present also some examples of what the NEP is doing on the rural areas, on housing, and hopefully see how it can inspire the topic of housing in rural areas. But without further ado, I wanted to say a few words about what is the NEP. That will appear on my next slide. So the NEP, it's an initiative. So I want to say that it's not a regulation, it's not a directive, but it's more a political initiative to pull efforts, an invitation for creators to create and contribute to the Green Deal. So this is the basics. The President von der Leyen once defined it as the soul of the Green Deal, and hopefully you will be able to see why. It draws inspiration from the original Bauhaus design of a school, but it wants to address pressing challenges of today's society, such as climate change, digitalization, but also housing. And how through design, craftsmanship, culture, the role of culture and innovation, and being extremely human-centric. It is based on 3 core values, which is sustainability, inclusivity, and beauty. And what is crucial for the European Bauhaus is to see these 3 values simultaneously. So to look at them at the same time, like a triple lens to observe reality, and not to take one but not the other, without discarding, without taking one but forgetting about the other. So, and it finally implies also a way of working that is participatory and a lot of times community-led, and also transdisciplinary, with a very high involvement of the arts and the creative disciplines. What does this mean in terms of housing is that the European Bauhaus approach embraces that housing should be affordable in terms of economic affordability, but also needs to be sustainable and in harmony with the environment and efficient in terms of energy needs. But it also needs to be beautiful in terms of quality. It should be something desirable and relatable versus something that is uniform for everybody, as we have seen in a lot of housing solutions in social housing, and where social interactions are enabled. So the European Bauhaus here, it brings to housing a multifaceted perspective that invites us to solve the tensions that are inherent, such as, for example, between affordability and quality, that we see a lot in many of our projects. So I wanted to pass very quickly on this slide for time issues, but it gives an idea of what has been achieved since 2021. No, it's the previous one. Sorry, Patricia. When the NEP was announced by President von der Leyen, it has built a growing community of more than 800 partners, 230 friends, 27 national contact points, and you can be part of the community just by applying to it through our website. It has mobilized close to 400 million euro from 9 EU programs and supported more than 500 projects. And this without being a program, just by being an initiative. We organize festivals, we have financed projects in Ukraine, we have communicated, and we have done this because we have a really thriving community. A little bit like the rural platform that was presented before by HOT. So in the next slide, as part of the work that we do with the community, for example, we have the NEP Lab, which is a think and do tank where we work with the community. Some labs are driven by the EC, they're driven by us, and other labs are driven by the community. And one of the labs that are driven by community is this NEP Lab of the Mountains that is working on the socio-ecological transformation in rural areas. Is led by South Tyrol mountainous area, and it works on 7 thematic clusters. And as you can see, one of them is sustainability and affordable housing. So if you want more information or be in contact with them, we can give you their contact details and more information if you want. On the next slide, I wanted to say that the NEP has also financed 23 lighthouse demonstrators that are testing and demonstrating how to transform neighborhoods with this NEP approach that I talked about before. We're working in 90 neighborhoods across 24 member states. And one of the themes of work is obviously housing, because we're working at neighborhood level with these 23 lighthouse demonstrators. So this is one of the examples. It's called Desire, Designing the Irresistible Circular Society. And one of the sites in which it's working is in Riga, for example, where they are working on a Soviet housing block from the 70s that is being transformed for social housing and other community services with the involvement of the neighbors. And this is something that is common to many of the projects. First, that they are very transdisciplinary. They look at the issue of housing in a very holistic way. So it can be related also with mental health, with youth, with many, many topics. And it works always involving the communities in the design and implementation of the projects. I'm going to pass to the next slide to give another example of another lighthouse project. This one is called Eyes, Hearts, and Hands. And they have developed a methodology based on these 3 elements. So eyes, it means that it needs to be aesthetically viable, but socially accepted, inclusive and socially fair. And then hands, with the engagement and actions for full sustainability. So again, to give an idea that always the methodology it's encompassing all these aspects. And in this case, the interventions were happening in a small town in Nepi, which is part of 13 municipalities that are part of this biodistretto, and is working with all the stakeholders, with organic farmers, with tourist agents on the future of this big area, but based on developments that can be good for the society, and not like throw away the people that live there and make their residents more expensive, which is another part of affordability. So if we go to the next slide, we also have affordable housing demonstrators that are financed by Horizon Europe. And here we're working at applying an integrated approach to housing again, in line with the European Bauhaus, aiming to provide quality housing that is affordable and inclusive, but here underpinned by innovative technologies. So really looking at tackling energy poverty through energy communities, but also exploring the potential of cultural and creative industries and sustainable business models. So also something that was mentioned before by Patrick. So I go on. I'm going to pass a little bit quicker over the
Laura,
next.
I have to
stop you. So very quickly. Just
okay, thank you.
These are other examples. I'm not going to stop on them. They come from many other initiatives that are each of them different. So just pass. This is the prizes that we do every year. And the example that was coming from a prize that was won in 2022. The next slide. I wanted to mention also that this year in 2025, the prizes are still open until the day after tomorrow. So on Friday evening, they will close. And in 2025, we have a special focus on housing, on affordable housing solutions. So you can still send an idea. Is the next slide, sorry. And now the next. And we also have a boost for small municipalities. So this happens in rural areas and urban areas below 20,000 inhabitants. And this is also open until tomorrow. So if you have nice ideas to send, you are still able. And last but not least, I have to stop in the future. And this is the new this is called the facility of the NEP. It's a new policy and financing instrument that we will have until 2027, and that is going to focus on the transformation of neighborhoods through research and rollout. So we will have many topics that are going to be researching, for example, housing, and also housing in rural areas. DG Agri is part of the inter-service group. You have contributed to the topics, and we will be very happy to give more information about it. Now, unfortunately, we are stretched by the time, so I'm going to finalize here, thanking you for the opportunity to present the European Bauhaus. There were many things that I wanted to present, and I will be here for any question that you will have, and I will provide all the links so you can share them afterwards with the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura, for this very interesting presentation on the initiative of European Bauhaus and all the projects around and the involvement of local communities. This holistic approach is very, very important for rural areas, and it's also linked to the approach of the Rural Pact. So let's continue the collaboration between the different initiatives presented this morning. And so thank you very much. Thank you also for the feedbacks in the chat on the previous presentation. So I will not open questions for you, Laura, but we can continue the discussion in the working groups. Now I'm going to give the floor to Martin Gauk from ESPON, who will present ESPON House for All. You have the floor.
Hello, good morning. My name is Martin Gauk. I work at the ESPON program, and today I'm going to present one of our projects, and I'm standing in for my colleague Sandra Di Biagio, who is behind this wonderful project. I hope that you can see my slides.
Not yet.
No, not yet.
Just let me try again. Is that working?
No, not yet. Now it's coming.
It seems that it's
yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. So just going to give you a quick, let's say, flavor of what we are doing. It's an ongoing project that we are intending to finalize this summer. It's a big consortium behind it with excellent researchers and very interesting insights. You can learn more about the project visiting our website. Today I'm going to just present a couple of preliminary results, highlighting that the work is still ongoing, and we are collecting data from different real estate platforms across Europe. So we are covering the EU 27 plus the EFTA countries within our research, and we are mining data from different real estate platforms. And currently we do it every week. And we have over 200 million data points already. So it's a big volume of data, and we collect data on the different rental and sales, about the prices, about the square meters, about also additional information that you can find from real estate platforms, the number of rooms, different amenities, etc. The more, let's say, you want, of course, the more difficult it is to get holistically, because usually the main information regarding prices and square meters, it's fairly easy. When it comes to pools, garages, etc., energy classes, the information is not so complete, but we are collecting it anyways, and we are also using it for different case studies. So we are trying to also see the homelessness aspect, the rural aspect, the energy aspect of the housing market also within the case studies. But the main bulk of the research is focusing on the affordability questions, and equally difficult as it is to collect the data on the prices is also the income dimension. So this is also something where I think at the European level we need to do more to have a more and better and more granular idea of what is the disposable income of our citizens. Within this research, we can ask many different interesting questions. So if you have your average disposable salary, how much square meters can you afford? Or you can set a bar, let's say, and ask how many years do I need to work to afford 100 square meters of an apartment or a house? And the preliminary results showcase a quite, let's say, in some cases very predictable results. Of course, the cities are more expensive, but also in some cases you can see that even rural areas are quite unaffordable in many countries. It may not mean that the prices are fairly high, but it can also mean that salaries are low. So you can see some interesting patterns. Also, different touristic areas pop out, such as the coastal areas, where also the inhabitants need to compete with the tourism side of the purchasing and housing market. And similarly, also we can see the different patterns when it comes to the rental market. We can see very low levels in Eastern Europe, in big cities, in coastal regions, and higher levels of rental affordability in rural areas. But also, it's important to highlight that the rental market is way more different in the rural areas. Usually, house ownership is higher there. We can also see how active the markets are. As I mentioned, we collect data weekly basis, so we can see how long different listings are remaining in the platforms, and we can also see some urban-rural patterns there. As I mentioned, at the moment we are just collecting the data and canvassing on these pan-European maps, but we also can do some, let's say, more interesting analysis with summary statistics using the degree of urbanization that also is behind the analysis. We can also see some other, let's say, interesting focuses brought into the projects, such as the impact of secondary housing. We know also this is very important when it comes to rural areas. And we can see also what is happening with shrinking regions. And we have quite many number of case studies when it comes to shrinking regions in Bulgaria, Romania, Portugal, France, Italy, and Norway. So a lot of interesting insights coming in. Hopefully, stay tuned for this summer. You can also read our latest data story on some of the results. I will post it also in the chat. Thank you very much. Sorry for being short, but that's the time. And happy to answer any questions if there is time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. Very, very interesting. A lot of data collection today from different angles, which is very important to better understand the issues in rural areas in terms of housing.